So let's just start back at the beginning for people who may not be as up to speed on this case as you are. Karen Read was who? She's living her private life in Massachusetts. Who was she before all this happened to her?
She was a single woman dating a law enforcement officer, had a great job in finance, and her family was a close-knit family, loved each other for all intents and purposes. When she reconnected with this boyfriend who was an officer, and they go out for a night on the town, they had a bit of a tumultuous relationship. And then that night, after some drinking at the bar, hanging out with a bunch of friends, everything changed forever.
So the prosecution, which would ultimately be charging her, alleges that they left this bar, they drove over to a friend's house, another cop, and that her boyfriend got out of the car, that he then walked up to the front door of the friend's house and went, sorry, this is what she alleges. She alleges he went to the front door of the house, he went inside, and something terrible happened to him. The prosecution said, no, he got out of your car, he never made it inside because you ran him over. You backed up into him at something like 24 miles an hour, hurting him, casting him into the snowbank, where he then later died from blunt trauma and hypothermia. Is that the basics?
Yeah, I mean, it turns on what happened after they got to 34 Fairview. Everybody's basically on the same page. They went to a couple bars. They were hanging out together. They were drinking together. Karen Read is driving her Lexus. Nobody disputes that. John O'Keefe, who's her boyfriend and the victim in this case, sitting in the front seat. They drive to 34 Fairview to hang out with the McCabe's and the Alberts, who are all connected to law enforcement and connected to people in Canton. She drops him off. He gets out of the car. There also seems to be third-party witness testimony that he gets out of the car. After that, that's where the stories kind of turn. If you believe the prosecution and the witnesses inside 34 Fairview, he never makes it inside the house. She backs up, hits him with her Lexus because she's angry at him about, a multitude of things, and they're fighting, and she wanted to end his life, I guess, is their point of view. If you believe Karen Read, she said he walked in towards the house. She didn't see John O'Keefe again. He stayed inside. He was supposed to come back out, kind of tell her what's going on. She gets pissed off, drives back to his house, calls him, leaves him all these angry text messages, and he never comes home. That's Karen Read's story.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until the wee hours of the next morning, like 5, 6 in the morning, that she and another then start searching for him. Like, what happened to him? Where's John? And, oh, wow, he's dead in the snowbank. How'd that happen? Now, there are two competing facts that I want to ask you about as I was just listening to this, because I didn't follow this case as closely as you did at all. But as I was listening to it, the best fact, well, there's two that I think the prosecution has, are as follows. Number one, that she allegedly said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And that an emergency worker, like a paramedic, heard that. And now she denies that, but you've got a third-party witness saying she said that. So that's a very good fact for the prosecution. And they also have tailgate plastic in his clothing, like from where her tailgate of her Lexus hit him. So it doesn't look like he got beaten up inside. It looks like he got hit by her car. Not just any car, but her car. So those are very good facts for the prosecution. On the other side, for Karen Read, the best fact I saw for her defense, because her defense is, no, he walked into the house. I didn't run him over. He went into the house, and then there was some cop-on-cop violence. Some old score got settled, and they beat him. They beat him to death, and then threw him in the snowbank and tried to say that I ran him over. And the best evidence I saw for Karen Read's theory was that someone inside that house allegedly Googled something to the effect of, how long can you be out in the snow before you die, before they found the body. Before they found the body, before she even had allegedly hit him. And that would certainly suggest the people inside the house were up to no good. Now, at trial, they disputed that piece of testimony. So can you walk us through that evidence, those Do I have like the best facts on both sides, or have I missed something critical?
Yeah, honestly, there's just so much. So we'll go with what you're asking, because it's really fascinating for somebody who's kind of followed it from a cursory point of view. And maybe, you've heard some of the highlights or seen some of the shows reporting on it, because it was fascinating. And it's really a case unlike any other I've tried personally myself or followed even, since I've been following these cases in the media. And you've brought up some big points of contention, and the prosecution absolutely pushed the "I hit him" comments as a confession. That's what they continue to call it, a confession. She confessed to law enforcement, to EMS right there on the scene. Karen Reed's team cross-examined those witnesses and said, if you had somebody that confessed, why didn't she get arrested? Why wasn't that immediately the investigation and they knew exactly what happened? Why was there any unknown? Why wasn't the investigation and the crime scene taken as they knew exactly what happened, that she hit him with her Lexus? And Karen Reed's team responds with, it was, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Which there are some other people that say that could have been.
Stand by. Let me just play that, because she spoke to Dateline. She didn't testify at her trials, but she did speak to Dateline. Here's Karen Reed trying to clarify that point in SOT 51.
I said, could I have hit him? Did I hit him?
How could that have been? I mean, you dropped him off at the house.
I don't know what else could have been. It was howling wind. I had YouTube blasting on the stereo. And I thought, did he somehow try to flag me down, which was the reaction I was hoping to garner as I slowly pulled away from the house? Did he come out and maybe trip or bend over to pick up his cell phone, and I ran over his foot, and then he passed out drunk? I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out, and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And just to be clear, Peter, this was after, so the night goes on, she allegedly hit him around right just after midnight. But according to her testimony, she didn't hit him. She waited for him to come back out of the party. He didn't. She got mad. She went back over to his house. And then by the next morning, by like 5 or 6 a.m., she and this other gal were like looking for him. And lo and behold, there he was, dead in the snowbank at the location of the party. So go ahead.
Right. And that is one of the big points of contention. And as you know, one of the big things now that there's competing civil lawsuits that we may talk about later, when we're talking about the criminal case and you're saying, here's the best evidence for one side and here's the best evidence for the other, the prosecution in this case has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt what happened that night. And that was one of the big difficulties when you have maybe some EMS and some people said, she said, I hit him. Some people said, did I hit him? Based on her conversations and a lot of what else happened that night, maybe it wasn't as clear of a confession, and nobody seemed to think that at the time that it was a clear confession. And then when you flip to his injuries, which you mentioned them as kind of good evidence for both sides, that her taillight pieces were, on him, in his sweater, kind of attached to him. How would they get there unless she hit him with her Lexus? And then she says his injuries match a fight, getting beat up by cops inside. He had raccoon eyes. He died from hitting the back of his head. And, the evidence shows maybe it was on a ledge and not a flat ground. That was a little, who was actually going to prove what injury was the cause of death and how he got it. So that was a big point of contention throughout. And if you looked at a lot of the medical evidence and the accident reconstructionists, to me, that's really where Karen.
That was a good fact for her. The fact that the Lexus expert at trial that said there was nothing recorded on this car of hitting somebody, of going 24 miles an hour or whatever it was, and running over another person like that he would have expected something to register in the car's brain, and nothing did.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with so many facts in this case is there was kind of competing theories on that, where if you hit a man that's 200 pounds, maybe that's not going to be enough to register an event when you have, a very heavy Lexus like that. And then there were some people that said, well, maybe it should have, and there's nothing on here that actually did register it. But even more so, Karen Reed had accident reconstructionists that were actually hired by the FBI while they were investigating this investigation, which we'll get into the shady stuff happening there as to why the FBI would even get involved. But Karen Reed ends up hiring those guys as her experts, and they do all sorts of different testing, and they can never create the same action where something hitting that taillight would explode out into the yard and on John O'Keefe the way that the prosecution said it happened in that case. It just wouldn't happen, especially with some of the videos and pictures where the taillights are still working without busting those little actual light bulbs inside. It was really fascinating.
Which was the case here?
Correct. The lights were still working.
So in other words, this was faked. In other words, the point is those guys killed him inside. They brought him out, and then they were the ones who hit her car to make it look like it had bumped into him.
So partially, they somewhat point the finger at the guys inside the house for beating John O'Keefe to death and leaving him on the lawn, but they allege that law enforcement actually cracked the tail light, placed the pieces there, mixed everything together so it would look like that tail light hit John O'Keefe. And they went so far as to, Alan Jackson, one of the defense lawyers in this case, had a chart of all the glass that was found at the scene. And there was a cocktail glass that was found on Karen Reed's car that was found nowhere else at the scene. So how really would it have gotten there but for somebody placing it on the bumper of Karen Reed's car, which was driven away from the scene, driven around the next morning, put on a tow truck, driven back, and we're supposed to believe that some of this cocktail glass stayed on there, and there was one hair that stayed on there that they said was John O'Keefe's hair, things that just were really hard to believe that the Commonwealth was trying to explain to a jury in this case.
Okay, so what the theory of the prosecution is easy to understand, that she and John hadn't really been getting along. He had talked about possibly breaking up with her. She was very angry that night. She was drunk, and in her drunken anger, she ran him over. And there was some debate about whether they overcharged the case. Should they have just charged it as a manslaughter? They went for murder too, which definitely raised the stakes for this jury. Like, it was intentional. She wanted to kill him, as opposed to just like heat of passion. She did something crazy. But the defense had a totally different version of events. And so for the clueless juror just walking into this case, why would John O'Keefe's fellow cops want him dead?
It's a great question. And if you look at the two criminal trials, because this went to trial twice, the first one was a hung jury. The second one was a not guilty verdict on all of the charges dealing with ending John O'Keefe's life. She was convicted of OUI, operating under the influence. But the big difference in the theme and theory of the defense case from trial 1 to trial 2 was this was a big conspiracy in trial 1. Everybody was involved. The people inside the house ended his life. The cops covered it up, and there was a hung jury. In the second trial, it's you can't prove anything. This investigation was so bad. These cops didn't do the interviews properly. They didn't record them. They didn't secure the scene properly. This evidence doesn't make sense. It looks like it could have been planted. These guys have been terminated. These text messages are disgusting, how they talk about Karen Reed and other people. And that was a not guilty verdict, that they couldn't prove the case. So two very different theories. But when they were trying to prove that somebody inside the house killed John O'Keefe, it was based on jealousy, because somebody inside the house had been texting flirtatious texts with Karen Reed, had kissed Karen Reed, and the defense was trying to use some videos in one of the bars as if these two guys were grappling and, play fighting, but they were kind of getting in the mood to fight, I guess. Some of it was, a little bit of a reach, but they were trying to say that they looked over across the bar and pointed at John O'Keefe and told John O'Keefe to come to 34 Fairview because basically they wanted to fight. And that was kind of their theme and theory of what the motivation for somebody being wanting to kill John O'Keefe inside that house.
Would the defense have posited, if they did, that law enforcement broke her tail light to make it look like it was Karen Reed? Because under this scenario, he goes inside the house, he gets murdered, but we've already talked about how she took off. She was there for a short time, then she left with that SUV. Did they posit that her taillight was broken later when she drove back in the morning and found the body?
So this taillight, there was so much litigation about this taillight. First, the defense says there was a video that shows she backed up very slowly into John O'Keefe's car at John O'Keefe's house. And that's how she cracked her taillight, and there was just a little crack in it. Not when she hit John O'Keefe. The prosecution says, no, it was totally damaged, destroyed, and they had in 46 different pieces. But what made the taillight so interesting is it was towed to the Sally Port, where law enforcement is. And when they tried to show when the SUV was dropped off, they showed an inverted video, a flipped video. And they were like, hey, nobody even went near this taillight. But then when you realize it's a flipped video, which they did in the middle of trial, then you realize there are people that walk by that taillight. And when you look closer at the entire time it was in the Sally Port, there are blips and cuts in and out and huge chunks of time missing where you don't see what's going on with that Lexus. And the defense said, well, where are those chunks? And the Commonwealth says, well, it's motion activated, so it might not be there. And then when they secured the crime scene the first day, they found a couple pieces of taillight in the yard, right, where John O'Keefe's body was found. But days and weeks and months went by, and they continued to find taillight piece after taillight piece after taillight piece in this front yard that they didn't find the first time they went, the second time they went, the third time they went. They just happened to be driving by and they'd find another piece of taillight. Very sketchy, unlike just about every investigation you've probably ever seen.
Every once in a while, something comes along that reminds us of the power of storytelling. Something bold, meaningful, and grounded in faith. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, is a new 7-part series from the Daily Wire based on the novels by Stephen R. Lawhead. In the series, as pagan gods fall silent and empires collapse, one man's faith lights the spark of a civilization reborn. It's a story about courage, order, and moral clarity. It's the kind of story Hollywood does not make anymore. Through blood, faith, and sacrifice, Merlin becomes the bridge between myth and history and shapes the destiny of kings. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, premieres exclusively on Daily Wire Plus on January 22nd, 2026. Watch the new trailer now at pendragonseries.com. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.